The mansion was a grand building that looked like it belonged in a storybook. Its high, shining windows reflected the evening sun, and the gardens surrounding it were full of colorful flowers that seemed to bloom just for the guests who arrived. The large wooden doors opened to a hall that smelled of fresh polish and flowers, a smell that immediately made anyone who entered feel a mix of awe and nervousness. The chandeliers hanging from the ceiling sparkled like captured stars, and the walls were lined with paintings of ancestors who had clearly lived lives full of wealth and influence. Every corner of the room told a story of power and luxury, and tonight, it would become a stage for an unexpected story of courage and talent. The aristocrat who owned the mansion was a tall man with sharp features and a presence that demanded attention. He moved through the rooms with a quiet confidence, his polished shoes making soft sounds on the marble floors. He had the kind of personality that could make a room go silent without saying a word. People respected him, some out of fear, others out of admiration. He was used to having control over every situation, and he enjoyed it, even if that meant testing those around him in ways that were not always kind. He believed in showing power, in proving that wealth and influence could shape events and people according to his will. The guests who arrived at the mansion that evening were a mix of old friends, business associates, and distant relatives. They were dressed in elegant clothes, their jewelry catching the light, their laughter echoing softly through the halls. Some moved confidently, as if they belonged there, while others looked around with curiosity, taking in the details of the home and imagining the stories that might have unfolded within its walls. Yet, beneath the glamour and laughter, there was an unspoken awareness of the aristocrat's reputation. Everyone knew he liked to have control, and some had witnessed moments when he had tested the limits of patience and humility of those around him. Among all the people in the mansion, one figure moved quietly, almost like a shadow. The maid had been working at the mansion for only a few months, but she had already noticed the small ways in which the aristocrat enjoyed asserting his authority. She was young, with soft features and kind eyes, and she carried herself with careful attention to detail. Her hands were steady when she carried trays of drinks, folded napkins with precision, and arranged flowers with delicate care. She spoke only when necessary, her voice gentle and polite. Yet, beneath her quiet demeanor was a talent that had never been recognized in such a grand setting. The maid had grown up in a small village, where life was simple but often hard. She had learned the value of persistence and hard work from an early age, helping her family with chores and small tasks to make ends meet. One of the few joys in her childhood was the piano. She had discovered an old, slightly worn instrument in her home, and even without formal lessons, she had taught herself to play. The music became her escape, a place where she could feel free and express herself in ways that words could not capture. She practiced every day, often waking up early or staying up late to touch the keys and create melodies that seemed to carry her worries away. Working in the mansion was different from anything she had experienced before. The scale of wealth, the formality of the events, and the constant presence of powerful individuals made her aware of her position. She knew her role, and she respected it, but she also kept her piano skills hidden. This was a place where revealing personal talents could either be ignored or used against her. She had learned to balance her pride in her ability with caution, knowing that one wrong move could draw unwanted attention. Yet, the piano remained her secret, her personal companion that no one else had access to. The evening was in full swing when she moved silently between the guests, serving drinks and making sure everything was perfect. The aristocrat watched her with a subtle interest, noticing the way she carried herself, the careful attention to her work, and the quiet focus that set her apart from others in the room. He knew she was capable of more than just her chores, and an idea began to form in his mind, one that would test her in front of everyone present. He had always enjoyed seeing how people reacted under pressure, and he thought this could be an entertaining experiment for the evening. The atmosphere was filled with anticipation, though most of the guests did not realize it yet. Laughter mingled with the soft sounds of conversation, crystal glasses clinking and shoes brushing against polished floors. The maid moved through it all with grace, her senses alert to the small details that others might miss, the slight shifts in the aristocrat's gaze, the subtle movements of the guests as they reacted to his presence. She had learned to observe, to understand the room without drawing attention to herself. And it was this awareness that often helped her navigate the sometimes unpredictable nature of working in such a household. In the corner of the hall, a grand piano sat, its polished surface reflecting the light of the chandeliers. It was a magnificent instrument, and its presence added an air of elegance to the room. No one paid it much attention at the moment, busy with their conversations and the flow of the evening. But for the maid, it was a reminder of the world she had always carried within herself. She felt a quiet connection to it, a sense that one day, her music might be heard by more than just the empty walls of her childhood home. As the aristocrat moved closer to the piano, the guests noticed a subtle shift in the energy of the room. There was a sense that something was about to happen, though none of them could predict what. The maid continued her work, unaware of the gaze upon her, but her mind occasionally wandered to the piano. She wondered if anyone would ever appreciate her playing in this environment, or if it would remain her secret forever. Little did she know, the evening was about to change everything in ways she could never have imagined. The hall was filled with anticipation, though it was quiet, almost imperceptible. The aristocrat's movements were deliberate, drawing attention without seeming to. He gestured for the guests to gather closer, and a murmur of curiosity spread through the room. The maid, sensing the shift, felt a small flutter of nervousness, though she continued her duties with careful composure. She had learned that staying calm and focused was the best way to navigate the challenges of her position. Yet, deep inside, she felt a spark of curiosity, wondering what might be coming next and how she would face it. By the time the guests had gathered near the piano, the maid stood quietly to the side, her hands slightly trembling. She had faced many small tests in the mansion before, but nothing like what was about to happen. The aristocrat, with a slight smile that carried both authority and expectation, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it held a weight that made everyone stop and listen. The room grew quiet, and all eyes turned toward the maid. For the first time that evening, she felt the weight of every gaze upon her, and her heart beat faster, mixing fear with a strange sense of anticipation. It was a moment that would test not just her skills, but her courage and her ability to remain herself in the face of pressure. And so, the evening's story began, in the grand mansion, under sparkling lights, with the secret talent of a quiet maid ready to be revealed to the world. The room had grown quiet, the soft murmurs of conversation replaced by a thick tension that seemed to float in the air. The aristocrat's sharp eyes were fixed on the maid, and she could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical presence. It was the kind of attention that made her stomach tighten, and yet, she reminded herself to breathe, to remain calm. She had faced difficult moments before, but this felt different. This was not just about chores or small mistakes. This was about being called forward, in front of an audience, to perform a skill that no one here had ever seen. And she could feel the unspoken intention behind it. The aristocrat wanted to test her, to see how she would react under pressure, perhaps even to embarrass her. As the aristocrat moved closer to the piano, his presence drew the eyes of every guest in the room. Some leaned forward slightly, curious, others exchanged glances, sensing that a spectacle was about to unfold. The maid stood just behind the piano, her hands lightly resting against the polished wood, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. She could hear the soft rustle of dresses and the gentle clinking of glasses as the guests settled in, waiting for what was to come. The sound was almost deafening in her ears, each little noise magnified by the anticipation that filled the room. He addressed the guests in a calm, deliberate voice, explaining that the maid possessed a certain skill, and that he wished to see it. There was a pause, a subtle smile on his face that hinted at amusement. He looked at the maid, his eyes expecting her compliance, and she felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She had not anticipated being called upon in such a direct way, and the idea of performing in front of this audience filled her with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. But even as her heart raced, a small spark of determination flickered inside her. She could not show fear. She had to face this moment with composure. With a quiet nod, she moved to the piano and lifted the heavy lid, revealing the gleaming keys beneath. The sound of the keys, even before she played, seemed to amplify the tension in the room. She could feel the eyes of every guest on her back, the aristocrat watching intently, and the weight of expectation pressed down upon her. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and she closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She reminded herself that this was her moment, a chance to show a part of herself that had always been hidden, even though it came with the risk of judgment. The first notes she played were soft, almost hesitant, as if testing the space around her. The sound was delicate, weaving through the room like a gentle breeze. The guests leaned in, surprised by the beauty of the opening melody. There was a brief pause in the aristocrat's expression, a subtle raising of his eyebrows, as he realized that the maid was not just performing mechanically. She was pouring emotion into every note. Each sound resonated with her own experiences, the long hours of practice, the quiet moments alone with the piano, and the music seemed to carry that history with it. As the melody continued, her confidence began to grow. Her fingers moved with increasing assurance, guided by a natural rhythm and grace that could not be taught. The room, which had been filled with tension and anticipation, started to shift. The guests' expressions changed from curiosity to admiration, their initial sense of expectation giving way to genuine appreciation. The aristocrat, who had intended this to be a moment of control and perhaps embarrassment, now found himself unexpectedly captivated. He had underestimated the maid's skill, and the realization left him momentarily silent. The music seemed to fill the space in a way that transcended the social hierarchies and expectations that had defined the evening. The maid's focus was absolute, and the outside world seemed to fade around her. She was no longer the nervous young woman standing in front of an audience. She was a musician, fully immersed in her art. The keys responded to her touch with a clarity and depth that she had never known could be heard beyond the walls of her own home. The melody swelled and softened, rising and falling with emotion, and the guests could not help but be drawn into the story the music was telling. Even those who had come expecting to witness a moment of discomfort for the maid now found themselves listening in awe. The aristocrat's expression shifted subtly as he observed her. There was a mixture of surprise and respect, emotions he did not often show openly. He had planned this evening with a certain intention, to entertain himself by placing someone in an awkward position, but the result was entirely different. The maid's talent had turned the tables, transforming a moment of potential humiliation into a display of grace and mastery. He realized that his perception of control was limited. Real talent and genuine passion could not be coerced or diminished by fear or expectation. As the performance progressed, the guests' reactions became more evident. Some leaned forward, eyes wide with admiration. Others whispered quietly among themselves, unable to contain their amazement. A few even held their breath, caught in the emotion of the music. The atmosphere in the room was no longer one of tension. It had transformed into one of shared experience, the audience collectively moved by the sound emanating from the piano. The maid's music had created a bridge between her and the people around her, erasing distinctions of class and role, and connecting them through the universal language of melody. Despite the growing confidence, the maid was acutely aware of the aristocrat's gaze. She felt the subtle tension in his posture, the way he leaned slightly forward as he listened. She knew he had expected something else, and part of her wondered if he would try to interrupt or criticize. But as the notes flowed effortlessly, she realized that the truth of her skill was evident in every sound. There was no room for doubt. The music spoke for itself. The audience, including the aristocrat, could not deny the beauty and precision of what she was creating. She felt a quiet satisfaction in this moment, a sense that she was finally seen for what she was capable of, even if it was unexpected. The performance reached a gentle climax, with the maid's hands moving swiftly across the keys, creating a cascade of sound that filled every corner of the room. The final notes lingered in the air, delicate and resonant, as if reluctant to fade. For a moment there was complete silence, the kind of pause that follows something remarkable. The guests absorbed the impact of the music, realizing they had witnessed something extraordinary. The aristocrat, who had intended to entertain himself at the expense of the maid, now found himself confronted with undeniable talent and poise. As the last note faded, the room remained quiet for a heartbeat longer, the audience collectively holding their breath before finally breaking into soft applause. The sound was tentative at first, then grew stronger as more guests joined in, their appreciation genuine and heartfelt. The maid slowly lifted her hands from the keys, her body relaxing as she finally allowed herself to breathe. She had faced the challenge, and in doing so, had transformed a moment of potential embarrassment into a demonstration of grace and talent that left everyone in awe. The aristocrat's response was measured, a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the skill that had been displayed before him. He had learned something unexpected that evening, that true ability could not be diminished by intention or circumstance, and that respect was earned not through position, but through talent and dedication. The maid, for her part, felt a sense of accomplishment and quiet pride. She had revealed her secret to a world that had never known it, and in doing so, had claimed a moment of dignity and recognition. The guests continued to murmur their admiration, some approaching the maid to offer kind words and congratulations. She responded with polite gratitude, her voice calm, though her heart still raced from the intensity of the experience. The piano, once an instrument of private joy, had become a bridge to a broader world, a medium through which she could express herself and connect with others. The aristocrat, who had set the stage with a different intention, now stood as a witness to her talent, the original plan of humiliation completely overturned by the unexpected beauty of her performance. In that moment, the room felt changed. The energy had shifted, the roles of power and expectation subtly altered. The maid had faced a challenge, and in doing so, had revealed something that no social position or plan could suppress. The music had spoken for her, carrying her story, her dedication, and her talent to everyone present. And as the guests continued to applaud, she realized that she had found a new sense of confidence, one that would carry her forward, not only in the mansion, but in life itself. The evening's challenge had become an opportunity, a turning point that would be remembered not for the intention behind it, but for the talent, courage, and grace that had shone in the face of expectation. As the maid continued to play, the music began to take on a life of its own. Her fingers moved across the piano keys with a fluidity that seemed almost magical, each note perfectly placed, each melody carefully woven into the next. What began as a tentative, careful performance grew into something confident, expressive, and deeply moving. The sound filled the room, echoing off the high ceilings and ornate walls, capturing the attention of everyone present. The guests, who had initially been curious or even skeptical, found themselves drawn into the music, unable to look away or speak. There was a rare sense of stillness in the room, a collective pause that acknowledged the beauty of what they were hearing. The aristocrat, who had intended to humiliate the maid, now found himself unexpectedly captivated. He had expected hesitance, a mistake, a moment to highlight her lower social standing, but the music spoke differently, carried not just skill but emotion, and that emotion was undeniable. He felt a flicker of surprise, quickly followed by a grudging admiration. It was impossible to ignore her talent, and for the first time that evening, he realized that control could not come from intimidation when faced with genuine ability. The audience around him shared the same realization, each guest silently acknowledging the depth of the maid's skill. Her hands moved with precision and ease, creating patterns of sound that seemed to tell a story without words. The music was complex yet accessible, filled with subtle shifts in tone that conveyed feelings ranging from joy to melancholy. She had learned to feel the piano, to let her emotions guide her fingers, and in this moment, her passion was evident to everyone in the room. The audience, who had come expecting a spectacle of control, found themselves witnessing something entirely different, a display of artistry and courage that transcended social boundaries. The maid's focus was unwavering. She barely noticed the guests' wide eyes or the aristocrat's rare silence. All that mattered was the connection between her and the piano, the way each note resonated through her body and into the room. She felt a sense of freedom, a liberation from the nervousness that had gripped her just moments before. The instrument became an extension of herself, allowing her to express thoughts and feelings she had long kept hidden. The melodies she created were more than music. They were an introduction, a revelation of her inner strength and talent. Some guests whispered softly to each other, sharing their astonishment, while others simply sat in rapt attention. It was rare to see such a performance in this setting, especially from someone whose presence in the mansion had been defined by service rather than artistry. They began to see her in a new light, not just as a maid, but as a person with exceptional ability and the courage to display it in front of an intimidating audience. The room was transformed from one of formality and social expectation to one of admiration and genuine human connection. The aristocrat could not help but lean forward slightly, his posture betraying his fascination. He had seen many displays of wealth and influence, but he had rarely encountered such raw, undeniable talent. The experience was humbling, though he would not admit it openly. He had orchestrated the situation with the intent of demonstrating his power, yet it had backfired in a way that forced him to respect the maid's ability. Each note she played was a reminder that skill and dedication cannot be measured by social position alone. As the performance progressed, the maid allowed herself small flourishes, gentle embellishments that added complexity and depth to the music. She experimented with dynamics, shifting from soft, tender passages to bold, resonant chords that filled every corner of the room. Her confidence continued to grow, fueled by the realization that her audience was captivated, not critical. She could feel the energy of the listeners, a silent conversation between her music and their reactions, and it encouraged her to give more of herself to the performance. The guests were moved in ways they had not anticipated. The music seemed to speak directly to them, evoking memories, emotions, and reflections they had not expected to encounter at such a gathering. Some closed their eyes, letting the melodies wash over them, while others watched the maid with admiration and awe. The social hierarchy that had defined the room moments ago seemed to fade, replaced by a shared appreciation for talent and human expression. It was a rare moment of unity, created entirely by the maid's dedication and artistry. The aristocrat's initial amusement had long disappeared, replaced by a complex mix of emotions. He felt admiration, surprise, and a subtle shift in how he viewed the maid. He had always been accustomed to orchestrating situations to highlight his own influence, yet here he was witnessing a reversal of roles. The maid, whom he had intended to embarrass, was now the center of attention, commanding respect through skill and courage. It was a lesson in humility and an unexpected reminder that influence cannot overshadow talent. Her playing began to reach a gentle climax, a series of cascading notes that resonated with emotion and technical mastery. The room was completely absorbed, the collective attention focused entirely on her and the music she produced. The guests were no longer thinking about their social standings or their evening plans. They were completely immersed in the performance. The piano had become a storyteller, and the maid its narrator, sharing a tale of perseverance, emotion, and artistry that transcended their expectations. As the final notes approached, the maid's hands moved with a graceful certainty, drawing each sound to a delicate close. The last chord lingered in the air, soft yet commanding, leaving a sense of completion and satisfaction. For a brief moment, there was complete silence, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, soft applause began, tentative at first, then growing stronger as more guests joined in. The sound of admiration was warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the room only minutes before. The maid lifted her hands from the piano and allowed herself a small, relieved breath. Her heart was still racing, but it was a different kind of excitement, a mix of pride, relief, and newfound confidence. She had faced the challenge and emerged not only unscathed but celebrated. The aristocrat, standing nearby, gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement, a quiet recognition of the skill and courage she had displayed. It was not his usual style of praise, but it carried weight because it was unexpected and sincere. The audience continued to murmur their appreciation, some approaching to offer words of admiration and encouragement. The maid responded with quiet grace, feeling a sense of connection to the people around her that had not existed before. She realized that her talent, once kept hidden, had the power to change perceptions, to bridge gaps between people, and to command respect in ways that authority alone could not achieve. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a voice, a medium through which she could communicate her strength and humanity. For the aristocrat, the experience was equally transformative. He had witnessed the power of genuine skill and dedication, and it reminded him that influence is not absolute. There are forces, like talent and courage, that cannot be controlled or diminished by status or intimidation. He had intended to entertain himself at someone else's expense, but instead, he had learned a lesson in humility and respect. The maid had shown that true strength can emerge in unexpected ways, and that recognition is earned not by position, but by what one brings to the world. As the applause continued, the maid felt a quiet sense of triumph. She had faced a situation designed to challenge her, and through patience, skill, and courage, she had transformed it into an opportunity to shine. The music had revealed her talent, and in doing so, had altered the perception of those around her. The room was now filled with admiration, respect, and a subtle shift in social dynamics, all centered on her performance. It was a moment that would not be forgotten, a turning point in her life and in the lives of those who had witnessed it. As the evening moved forward, the guests carried with them the memory of the performance, a story of unexpected brilliance and courage. The maid, who had once been unseen and unappreciated, now stood as a symbol of talent and quiet strength. The piano had given her a voice that could not be silenced, and the aristocrat, along with the other guests, had learned that true ability cannot be overshadowed by power or intention. The music had done more than entertain. It had transformed the room, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. The atmosphere in the room had changed completely from the moment the maid had begun playing. The air that once carried tension and quiet expectation now seemed filled with a kind of admiration and awe. Guests who had arrived expecting a performance designed to amuse the aristocrat at her expense now found themselves witnessing something much deeper, a display of talent and composure that left a lasting impression. Whispers of astonishment passed from person to person, and the initial social hierarchy that had seemed so rigid appeared to fade in the glow of her skill. The piano had become the center of attention, and the maid, previously unseen, was now commanding it. As the notes flowed from the piano, the maid's confidence continued to grow. Each chord, each melody, was a reflection of her dedication and the countless hours she had spent perfecting her talent in solitude. She allowed herself subtle flourishes, small improvisations that added depth and emotion to the piece. With each gesture, she not only demonstrated technical mastery, but also shared a piece of her inner self with the audience. There was a narrative in the music, a story of perseverance, courage, and quiet strength that resonated with those who were listening. The aristocrat, who had hoped for amusement at her expense, could not deny the power of what he was witnessing. The guests' reactions were shifting visibly. Some leaned forward in their chairs, eyes wide with admiration, unable to tear their gaze away from her hands dancing across the keys. Others whispered quietly to one another, marveling at the unexpected brilliance of the performance. Even those who had been skeptical or indifferent were drawn in, their expressions softening, their attention fully captured. It was as if the music had woven an invisible thread connecting everyone in the room, breaking through the formalities and social expectations that had previously separated them. The aristocrat's posture subtly changed as he observed the performance. He had always prided himself on his ability to command attention and orchestrate the behavior of those around him. But this time, he found himself captivated by something beyond his control. He realized, perhaps for the first time in such a setting, that genuine skill could not be diminished by status or manipulation. The maid's talent demanded recognition on its own terms, and the aristocrat could only watch, quietly absorbing the lesson she was imparting without words. His original intention had been subverted. What had been meant as a display of power had transformed into a moment of revelation. The music flowed through the room like a living thing, filling every corner and capturing the imagination of those present. The maid's focus was complete, her body and mind entirely immersed in the performance. She no longer noticed the whispers, the stares, or the subtle glances of the aristocrat. Her connection was solely with the piano and the expression of her music. Each note was deliberate, each pause carefully measured, conveying emotion with clarity and depth. The performance had become a dialogue, a silent conversation between her and everyone in the room, where admiration and respect replaced expectation and judgment. The guests were moved in ways they had not anticipated. Some felt a pang of emotion, memories stirred by the melodies that echoed with feeling. Others were inspired, impressed by the poise and courage it took to perform so openly in front of such a critical audience. The Maid's playing seemed to erase distinctions, creating a shared experience that brought everyone together, if only for the duration of the music. The social dynamics that had governed the evening moments ago were now transformed. It was not wealth, power, or influence that commanded attention. It was talent, dedication, and authenticity. The aristocrat, watching the Maid, could not help but reassess his own expectations and assumptions. He had intended to assert authority, to draw attention to her position in the household, and perhaps to amuse himself and the guests at her expense. Instead, he witnessed the power of talent and resilience. The realization was humbling, though he maintained a composed exterior. There was a quiet admiration in his gaze, a subtle acknowledgement that the Maid had turned the situation completely around. Her music had transformed not just the room but also the perception of everyone within it. The Maid's fingers continued to move with increasing confidence, her body swaying slightly to the rhythm as she allowed herself to become fully absorbed in the music. Her expressions subtly shifted with the mood of the piece, revealing the emotions behind the notes. She was no longer merely performing. She was sharing a story, one that spoke of her journey, her perseverance, and the quiet determination that had brought her here. The audience felt it, their responses changing from polite acknowledgement to genuine engagement. They were experiencing the depth of her talent and the courage it took to present it so openly. The performance reached its emotional peak as the Maid executed a series of intricate passages with precision and grace. The room was silent except for the piano, the sounds resonating through the high ceilings and ornate walls. The intensity of the moment was palpable, the audience collectively holding its breath, caught in the power of her music. Every note she played seemed to reinforce her presence, commanding attention in a way that transcended social rank or expectation. She had become the focal point, not because of her position in the household, but because of the undeniable skill and emotion she brought to the performance. The aristocrat observed, a quiet realization settling within him. He had thought to teach a lesson, to assert control, but he now saw that his lesson was not one of dominance but of humility. The Maid had shown that courage and talent could not be undermined by intention or hierarchy. Her ability to captivate the audience had created a shift in perception, not just among the guests but also within him. He recognized, perhaps with some surprise, that true mastery and grace commanded respect effortlessly. The audience's admiration was growing, their initial curiosity replaced by genuine appreciation. Some moved closer, leaning in to observe her technique and the emotion conveyed through each note. Others shared quiet whispers, expressing astonishment at the skill and composure she displayed. The room, once filled with a sense of anticipation and tension, was now alive with admiration and respect. The social experiment intended by the aristocrat had become an unintended celebration of talent and human connection. The Maid, sensing the energy in the room, allowed herself to take small liberties in her performance, experimenting with dynamics and tempo to add depth to the piece. Each edition was met with subtle reactions from the guests, raised eyebrows, soft smiles, quiet gasps of amazement. She could feel their engagement, their attention, and it gave her a newfound sense of empowerment. She was no longer just a participant in an orchestrated scenario. She was the center of a shared experience, guiding the room through her music and presence. As the performance continued, the aristocrat found himself reflecting on the nature of power and influence. He had believed that authority could manipulate perception and control outcomes, but here was an undeniable proof to the contrary. Talent and courage operated independently of status, and the Maid's skill had demonstrated that in the most compelling way. His own presence, once a symbol of dominance, had become secondary to the artistry that filled the space. The experience offered a lesson he could not ignore, one that would linger beyond the evening. The maid's final notes approached, and she played them with careful intention, drawing the music to a gentle, resonant close. The room was quiet once more, the audience fully aware of the significance of what they had witnessed. Her performance had transformed the evening, turning a moment of potential embarrassment into a demonstration of talent, courage, and composure. The applause began softly at first, then swelled as the guests collectively expressed their admiration. It was heartfelt and genuine, a tribute to the unexpected brilliance that had emerged in front of them. The maid lifted her hands from the piano, allowing herself to breathe and take in the reactions around her. Her face reflected a quiet satisfaction, a mix of relief and pride in having faced the challenge with grace. She had navigated a delicate situation with poise, and her performance had shifted perceptions and commanded respect. The aristocrat, observing with a measured expression, gave a subtle nod, acknowledging her accomplishment. Though he rarely offered such recognition, it carried weight precisely because it was unexpected and sincere. The guests continued to express their admiration, approaching her with kind words and congratulations. Each interaction reinforced the idea that her talent had not only been seen but also genuinely appreciated. The experience created a lasting impact, not only on the audience but also on the maid herself. She had revealed a side of herself that had long remained hidden, and in doing so, had earned a newfound sense of confidence and recognition. The evening had become more than a social gathering. It had evolved into a moment of transformation, where skill and courage reshaped perceptions and left a memorable impression. The aristocrat, now reflecting quietly on the evening, realized that the lesson had been more profound than he had anticipated. His plan had been to assert control, but he had learned that authority alone could not diminish talent or courage. The maid's performance had illuminated the power of skill, dedication, and authenticity, teaching him that true respect is earned through action and excellence rather than position. It was a humbling yet enlightening moment, one that would likely influence his perspective in the future. As the room slowly returned to conversation and movement, the memory of the performance lingered in the minds of all present. The maid, once nearly invisible in the background, had emerged as a figure of admiration and inspiration. Her music had created a shared experience that transcended social boundaries, leaving a lasting impact on both the guests and the aristocrat. The turning point had arrived, a moment when the unexpected beauty of talent and courage transformed the intended after the performance. The room was filled with a different energy than before. The initial tension and anticipation had been replaced by admiration, curiosity, and a sense of shared experience. Guests spoke quietly among themselves, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. They had come expecting a performance meant to entertain the aristocrat at the expense of the maid, but they had instead been part of a moment that highlighted courage, talent, and human connection. Each person seemed affected, carrying with them a new awareness of the maid's abilities and her quiet strength. The maid, standing beside the piano, allowed herself a deep breath. Her heart still raced, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of having faced a challenge and turned it into an opportunity. She felt a sense of accomplishment and pride she had not expected to experience in this setting. The music she had played was more than just sound. It had been a story of her perseverance, a reflection of her journey from a quiet, unseen servant to someone whose talent demanded recognition. She looked around, taking in the expressions of the guests, seeing surprise, admiration, and even respect in their faces. It was a moment she would remember forever. The aristocrat observed the scene with a composed yet reflective expression. He had initially intended to assert authority, perhaps to create a moment of amusement at the maid's expense. Instead, he had been shown something far more powerful, the strength of talent, determination, and authenticity. He realized that influence and control could never replace genuine skill or the courage to display it. His respect for the maid, though quietly expressed, had grown significantly. It was a rare acknowledgement for him, one that carried weight precisely because it was unspoken and unexpected. Some guests approached the maid to offer congratulations, their words genuine and heartfelt. They praised her skill, her poise, and her ability to captivate an audience under pressure. The maid responded with polite gratitude, her voice calm but carrying a hint of the pride she felt inside. These interactions reinforced what she had already sensed, that her performance had created a lasting impression. She had shared a part of herself with people who had not known her, and in doing so, she had earned a measure of recognition and respect that extended beyond her role in the household. The room continued to hum with conversation, though the topic had shifted. Guests now spoke of the music, of the way the maid had turned what could have been an embarrassing moment into a demonstration of talent and grace. They discussed her skill, her composure, and the unexpected beauty of the performance. Even those who had arrived with little interest in the piano found themselves captivated, reflecting on how someone so unassuming could create such a profound impact. The social dynamics had subtly shifted, and it was clear that the maid's presence had changed the way everyone viewed her. The maid herself reflected on the evening, realizing that her secret talent had finally been seen. She had spent years practicing in quiet, often feeling that her music was meant for no audience. Yet, in this unexpected moment, her abilities had been acknowledged, admired, and celebrated. It was a validation of her dedication and perseverance, and it gave her a new sense of confidence. She understood, in that moment, that her skills were not limited by her position or circumstances. Talent, when shared with courage and sincerity, could speak louder than any expectation or plan. The aristocrat, meanwhile, was processing the unexpected turn of events. He had believed that his plan to assert control would create amusement at the maid's expense. Instead, he had witnessed the transformative power of talent. He recognized, perhaps for the first time in such a public setting, that genuine ability could not be overshadowed by authority. It was a subtle lesson in humility, a reminder that respect must be earned, not commanded. Though he rarely admitted such insights, the experience left an impression that would likely influence his interactions in the future. The audience, now fully engaged in conversation about the performance, began to see the maid not just as a servant but as a person with remarkable talent and quiet strength. They admired her courage to perform under pressure and the grace with which she handled the situation. The applause, though it had settled, left lingering appreciation, a silent acknowledgement of her achievement. Guests moved closer, seeking to understand the person behind the music, to hear her thoughts and experiences, and to celebrate her accomplishment in a way that felt personal and genuine. The maid's sense of pride grew with each interaction. She realized that the performance had done more than display her technical skill. It had revealed her character, her determination, and her ability to face challenges with composure. The admiration she received was not simply for her music, but for her courage, her poise, and the way she had transformed a potentially humiliating situation into a moment of triumph. She felt seen, understood, and appreciated in a way that transcended her role in the household, and it gave her a profound sense of fulfillment. The aristocrat, observing quietly, could not deny the impact of the evening. His plan had been subverted, yet the result was richer and more meaningful than he could have anticipated. He had intended to control the narrative, to assert dominance, and perhaps even to entertain himself at someone else's expense. Instead, he had witnessed the power of genuine talent and the courage it takes to share it. The experience had altered the perception of those present, including his own, and highlighted the importance of recognizing skill and dedication regardless of social standing. As the evening continued, the conversation among the guests shifted to reflection and admiration. Many spoke of the unexpected beauty of the performance and the courage it required. They expressed their surprise at the talent of someone they had barely known and discussed the lasting impression it had left. The maid's name became a topic of admiration, her presence no longer simply a part of the household staff, but a source of inspiration and appreciation. The impact of her performance extended beyond the music itself, touching the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed it. The maid, feeling the weight of the evening, reflected quietly on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the years she had spent practicing in solitude, the challenges she had overcome, and the courage it had taken to step into the spotlight, even when uninvited. She understood that her talent had the power to influence perception, to create connection, and to command respect. The experience reinforced her belief in the value of dedication, persistence, and the courage to embrace one's abilities when the moment demands it. The aristocrat, having observed the responses of the guests, considered the broader implications of what had occurred. He had been reminded that influence and authority, while powerful, are not absolute. There are forces that operate independently of status, and talent is one of them. The maid's performance had demonstrated that true skill and courage can shift perception, inspire admiration, and create lasting impact. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and the power of human potential. The guests continued to circulate, many returning to express further appreciation to the maid. They spoke of the beauty of her music, the courage it took to perform, and the composure she displayed. Each compliment reinforced the sense of accomplishment and pride she felt. The evening, originally intended to entertain the aristocrat, had instead celebrated the maid, elevating her presence and acknowledging her contributions in a way that transcended her assigned role. It was a recognition that would stay with her, a moment that validated both her skill and her inner strength. As the night drew to a close, the atmosphere remained charged with admiration and reflection. The maid had transformed a situation meant to challenge her into a defining moment of achievement. Her performance had shifted the perceptions of everyone present, including the aristocrat, who now viewed her with a newfound respect. The music had spoken, and in its echoes, the audience had witnessed courage, talent, and resilience. The maid returned to her duties with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She carried herself with a new confidence, aware that she had been seen, appreciated, and respected. The experience had changed the way she viewed herself, reinforcing her belief in the power of talent and determination. The aristocrat, too, reflected on the lessons of the evening, recognizing the importance of humility and the value of acknowledging skill and courage, no matter where it appears. By the end of the night, the mansion had returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of the performance lingered. The guests departed carrying with them stories of the unexpected brilliance they had witnessed. The maid had become more than a figure in the background. She had emerged as a symbol of talent, courage, and quiet strength. The piano, once a private instrument, had become a voice that shared her story with the world. The evening had transformed not only her life but also the perspectives of those who had been present, leaving an enduring impression that would be remembered long after the music had ended.